asked for it, so here it is, because I was going to do a video on something else this week, but more or less you guys had told me through more than one comment that essentially summarizes itself in, hey, you just spent an hour talking about handgun RDS, why not give us a recommendation list or a list that you wouldn't recommend? So we're actually going to go through that. And I'm actually going to lead off with handgun optics that I've seen work well for people, but I'm still not going to recommend for one reason or another. And a lot of this is based off of not just my personal experience, but it's also in combination with what I see through the student base, because it's not like we stop things for bad weather. So this gives us an enormous amount of variability in different temperature types, weather patterns, times of day, things like that. So even optics that I've seen do fairly well for most folks, there are still things that I'm not going to recommend based off of more or less a probability of failure in some way that is significantly higher than stuff I would recommend. We're going to follow this up with a list of optics that I just sort of laugh at, and then we're going to talk about the recommendations. So far as recommendations go, this happens to be a recommendation for either a duty capacity or concealed, and some of this is more specifically tuned toward concealment, but I'll make it readily obvious when that subject comes up. That said, speaking of concealment, do you go to the gym because you don't want to be a loser, but then you're stuck with bad gun carrying options? Like a loser? What is this? A gun girdle? A waist purse? And don't even get me started with the stupidly slow draw times. There must be another way. And now there is, with Arrowhead Tactical Apparel. Yeah! Introducing the way to carry in gym shorts with your regular concealed carry setup. From small guns to full-size guns, the internal belt allows you to wear athletic clothing for an athletic gun. With Arrowhead Tactical Apparel, you could do all the athletic things that you couldn't comfortably do before, like tie your shoes, run with the dogs, rescue an idiot from the bottom of a well.
What's up, girl? What's going on? What's going on? Is Chavez stuck in the well? Wait a minute, what? What are you saying? Cletus got the fit? Cletus got the fit? Where? Where?
Assist your peers through personal development, and much more. This is perfect for anyone who likes wearing athletic clothes who knows how annoying and unsafe it is to carry with an elastic waistband. And guess what? There's
options.
There's shorts. And if you're weird and don't like shorts, there's joggers. Or joggers, but more. You can even get yourself set up with something sweet like a hoodie or a shirt. They even make their own holsters. There's lots of styles to choose from, with options for both men and women, so everyone can be comfortably prepared.
But wait, there's more!
Use code REGULARGUY to save on anything in their store. I hear they do some cool sales every once in a while too. Remember to tell them I sent you, because if you want to dress and carry comfy too, Arrowhead Tactical Apparel is for you. So yeah, I actually really had a lot of fun putting that together. The problems that they address are problems that I've had for quite some time, whether I'm with the fam and the dogs out and about all at once, or if I'm just trying to do my own gym stuff. So they solve a lot of problems that I've been looking at for quite some time personally, and the solution that they came up with is frankly great. So check their stuff out, use the appropriate code. I'm gonna buy an appropriately sized set of shorts, and we're gonna go from there. Okay, so let's lead off with my category, and what better way to start than the Acro P2? Look, I've seen enough of these work really well. I've seen a lot of people do good work with them, but they do have a couple of quirks that I don't like. Now, I recognize that they have to use a goofy footprint. I really don't like the footprint that they're using with their brand new stuff that comes out. Time will tell whether or not that's any good, or whether or not we're just going to forget that in about a year. But as far as the Acro P2 is concerned, when we start talking about dropping the owl vision during dark time hours, okay, that really small window that's smaller than an RMR Type 2's window is really, really noticeable, because light transmission is a big thing. Now, I recognize that this is a niche application, but it is something that I do have to bring up because I do teach a lot of stuff in the dark. Far more seriously is I notice a much greater than zero chance of moisture invasion being a problem on these optics. I've seen it a bunch, and far rarer, but still concerningly higher, greater than zero chance, I've seen little screws floating about on the inside of these guys too. And that's obviously suboptimal, because if you have random metal bits that are floating about inside of your optic, those were attached to things at one point, and now it's kaleidoscoping loading on the inside of this optic at 900 to 1,000 rounds per minute. So all that put together, I'm not the biggest fan of this thing. I understand that a lot of guys have done a lot of good work with them, but I'm still not going to recommend them because, frankly, that's a bunch of money to spend on to what equates to essentially a gamble that is significantly more in the house's favor rather than yours. Same thing goes for Steiner. Essentially rinse and repeat everything I just said, in addition to now having an even goofier optic body for some reason. Who put that together? I don't understand who designed that, and I don't think they were sober during the board meeting before they put that into production. Vortex is another one of these. Now look, up until this point, up until the Defender XL, I hated everything that they produced. Their electronics protection package was ridiculously bad, and on top of this, you also have bad refresh rates. But it seems that the Defender XL, based off of my personal experience in watching other guys come through class with it, it's a perfectly serviceable dot. I just can't get over how bad their decision-making process was in going with a Delta Point footprint. The Delta Point has never been a good dot. The Delta Point reticle itself is basically extinct, and I don't understand why people continue to use this footprint. Because who honestly cares about the Delta Point? Nobody. The only one that uses their footprint is for use with other optics. Yeah, I get it. A lot of guys are into them, and a lot of guys like them. I just find their footprint completely unnecessary and kind of dumb, because if you want to make a change to anything else, now I have to, at very least, buy a new plate, and at very most, buy a new slide. I'm not okay with that, but if you've already got it and it works great for you, fine. The Holosun 509T is another example of an optic that I've seen work really well for lots of folks, but I've got issues with it. Now, I've already done a review on this, and again, I've seen a lot of people do well with them, but they seem to have sealing issues as well, because I've seen a lot of these optics at this point that are moisture invaded. Now, I've seen a lot more of them do well, but again, if I'm gambling with technology, which is always a gamble in the first place, and I see this sort of issue in my supposed to be closed emitter optic, but then I have fogging issues on the inside of it, I'm not exactly going to recommend that to folks. But if you've already got it and it works well for you and it continues to work well for you, what am I going to be mad about? So now we're more or less going to rapid fire ourselves through a few examples of dog water optics, and a lot of them have cult-like followings from people that don't shoot guns. And before I get started with that, I recognize that you're about to tell me that yours has been great for you, but then you're also going to underpin in your little comment that you've only shot it for a couple thousand rounds. I don't care, man. I've seen enough people come through class with optics like these, and it never works out good for them, especially because 700 rounds a day was never really on the planning phase sheet of the design emphasis for these products. You can basically tell. So with that said, here we go. Crimson Trace has never made a reliable product. I'll die on this hill, and I don't think it's a stretch to say. Lasers, optics, pick a thing, everything they make is bad. Remember when EOTech put out a handgun RDS? No, crazy, because we forgot about that in about a month. Sig Sauer just... Now, I recognize Swamp Fox fans, all 4 of you, that you like your optics. That's neat. No one else wants a handgun RDS made out of toilet paper rolls. I don't think literally anyone has ever taken Burris seriously, and you shouldn't either. Doctor optics seem to be made by people that like to wear scarves and prescription-less glasses. And they're fragile. So I'm gonna go with no on that too. Far as Bushnell goes, see my previous Burris comment. Primary Arms seems to they themselves perfectly understand that they are the cheaper, worse version of Holosun optics, which is my bare minimum for a handgun RDS. So if you're underneath my bare minimum, I'm gonna go with no. O-Light or O-Sight, besides this being the worst naming convention I have seen in a real long time, they just make me laugh, because everything they do is like an incel trying to find a trad wife in Miami. It's not gonna happen, guys. Give up. Everything you do is failure in physical form. Shield sights seem to be mounted exclusively to Hellcat pistols, and that entire combination is just something you shouldn't even look at. Cy Lee is hilarious, because look, I know that the League of Extraordinary Budget Gun Builders, otherwise known as the PSA Forum guys, have a serious love affair with Cy Lee optics for some reason. But here's the thing, guys. The minute that you make your guns anything other than wall ornaments, I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna break. You're not gonna believe me. You're gonna show up to class just to prove me wrong, and I won't be proven wrong. Cy Lee is awful. They either break on contact or they break exactly like the Challenger did, where everything starts out great, one little thing starts to go wrong, and then everything comes apart. So this is just a start, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's 100 other options and optics that are made by people that follow a very similar format. And that format is real cheap, real flimsy looking, and just by the eye test, you should be able to look at it and be like, that's not gonna work. But then people try anyway, and then assert that they work good until they actually start to use them, and then once they break, they very quietly switch to something that's recommended by other people that have actually done a lot of this stuff without saying a word to other people and then pretending like they knew the answer the whole time. And yes, dear viewer, I know that I just brought to mind about 6 people in your head right now. And yes, in addition, if you are a viewer and also this person, we know who you are. And the second you make a comment, you're going to make yourself known. Feel free to get into a fight with everybody in the comments. You're going to lose. But that said, let's go ahead and talk about optics that actually work and go from there. So let's talk about my bare minimum. And by bare minimum, I don't mean barely squeaking in there, barely doing the job. You're going to replace them a million times. No. I'm saying that this product line, Holosun, works. They work well. If you were to only use their optics, you would be in good shape because they do in fact do the job. They do the job quite well. There's a million SKUs to suit whatever needs that you have, whether theoretical or then experimented with and understood. There are, however, a couple of quirks, and that's what puts them as the bare minimum for me. First one's kind of small, and that's the adjustment of the turrets. I kind of hate that I have to use a tiny jeweler's flathead to adjust my friggin' turrets. I would so much rather just use the back end of a casing. Is this a big deal? No, it's not a big deal. It's just a minor annoyance. The next one is actually slightly a bigger issue though. A lot of their 507, 508 line, for instance, they use RMR footprint, sorta. The thread pitch is the same on the screws, but the screw heads or caps themselves are slightly different in dimensions than, for instance, an RMR set of screws. So if you're going to use this optic on an RMR cut, you need to make sure to use the Holosun provided screws, even if they're too long. So now you have to make sure that you have a Dremel to shave a little bit off of them, because if you have a direct cut for an RMR as a for instance, you need to make sure that you're using their screws, and if you have to cut them to suit the length of the slide that's cut for, you need to make sure that that happens too. Now, Holosun got wise to this, and to their credit, they do provide extra screws so that you can do this sort of thing, but it is something to mention. So it's a tiny quirk. Is it a big issue? No, but it's something that I've noticed a lot of people not talking about, even though this is a fact. This is a thing that happens, and it's not really something that can be changed on their older stuff too, especially considering the screw heads or caps that are designed the way that they are designed to fit with the optic bodies themselves. So it's not like this is going to change unless it did magically with the 507 comp and someone discovered this. But at the very least, up to this point, up to my knowledge, you need to be aware of this. Also, as far as tiny guns are concerned, the K variants of the 507 line are basically the best in class, because yes, I'm aware that the RMR CC exists, but I do like smaller dots on the fact that I have to have a smaller optic, and frankly, I like slightly smaller dots in general. But as far as this is concerned, they seem to be the best suited for this particular pattern of guns. So we're talking like your 43Xs, your shields, and the like. In addition to this, the lower startup cost that the smaller guns have a tendency to have also sort of goes with the K variant of the Holosun optics in general. That said, also, even though it's a smaller dot, it still seems to be very well protected as far as electronic components are concerned. I've seen a lot of them come through class up to this point, and the number one opinion that I have on this particular variant or size of handgun RDS is that it's boring, dude. I don't have anything to say, really. Another downside of Holosun optics is frankly their shake awake feature. And it's not that it exists, it's the fact that it's a requirement to get you as much battery life as possible, because it would just seem that the electronics components inside of these optics are significantly more power hungry than, for instance, anything RMR related. And this frankly is for two reasons. One, this could just be the quality of the electronics components themselves being of lesser quality than, again, something that is made inside of an SRO, RCR, RMR, whatever. And the other one seems to be because of the deliberate reliance on a smaller battery. Now, I'm not a fan of this, mostly because it seems to, comparatively speaking, kind of cripple the battery life, because it doesn't really matter what it is they advertise. What matters is real use case battery life for this company, for this type of optics set, things like that. And what you seem to get, if you carry the thing regularly, and if you use the thing regularly, is about 4 to 5 months. That seems to be the limit, regardless of the reticle option that you use, and this is something you kind of got to get in front of. Now, I know someone, again, is about to type this up and say, hey, my battery's lasted for over a year, and this is probably the guy that has a gun that sits on top of a dresser for all time, and that's how you get to that battery life. But for those of us that actually use our optics, around about 4 to 5 months is what you're going to end up with if you carry the thing, train with it, that sort of stuff, just regular use. That said, if I were to make like an apex recommendation for Holosun in general, is that if you could use regular RMR footprint, the 507 comp is just it. I don't really care what else is in the line, even if it is serviceable. The 507 comp has the largest reticle options that are actually useful rather than useless. It's got the largest window to provide you enough air for a little bit of error on the presentation of the gun, and I'm not the only one that really thinks so. A lot of people are replacing their SROs with 507 comps because of this reason. The other recommendation that I would really make is honestly the 507K is basically the best in class as far as tiny dots going on tiny guns. So take whatever you want from that, run with it. And the other set of big ups that I'm going to give to a different company, in other words, a company that you can just sort of buy from and not really have to worry too terribly much about, and to have optics failure from them is frankly quite rare as far as statistics are concerned, comes from, no surprise, the land in which ACOGs are made. Yes, they're pricey. Yeah, they're probably more expensive than they're actually worth, but the quality, service life, and simplicity of these optics is frankly why they get to name their own price. Because let's just be straight here. I don't care who says what. As far as overall volume is concerned, as far as longevity of both the optic itself and the batteries that are in them, as far as resistance to really high round counts before something goes wrong in them, as far as resistance to damage in general, and as far as understanding exactly what shooters need and providing nothing else, which is frankly what most of us want in the first place, these guys have it together. They've always had it together. And paying twice as much for an RMR HD over what you would pay for in terms of a 507 comp, frankly, to most people is worth it. And honestly, personally, if I could only pick one, I'm gonna go with a Trijicon product first. Because look, even if we were to bring back the discontinued Type 1 RMR, that was never made for handgun stuff, okay? This is a submachine gun optic that was never made to deal with the force requirements of a handgun cycling. All you really needed was a contact plate, some electrical tape, and you're set. It would just run. It would run well. It's just people, namely Trijicon, got tired of not warrantying things. The Type 2 RMR, as a for instance, which is the first one I would recommend on this list, is essentially Trijicon saying, fine, here's the pistol dot version, go nuts. Yes, we'll warranty it now. That's it. Because on the inside, it's essentially the same, they just modified the contacts to deal with the handgun shaking everything apart. As far as overall experience with what I've seen so far, and I can't really put the RCR on the recommended list for all time just yet, because while I do really like it, while I did do a review on it, it hasn't been around long enough for me to be definitive in saying this, so I'm leaving this off the list, by the way. Same thing for the RMR HD. If you need an optic to work forever, if you need it to be the most resistant thing on your kit, the Type 2 RMR, at least for now, is it. Now, this is mostly because of the overall simplicity philosophy that Trijicon tends to have, because they don't give you a million options, they give you a million SKUs. And regardless to what a lot of people have said as far as innovations, and a lot of times innovations are air quoted, I have seen a lot of these optics come and go. I've seen a lot of these optics show up and stay. There is always one that seems to be consistently tougher than everything that we see, and that's the Type 2 RMR by a very, very wide margin. And look, there's a lot of people that will make a lot of different complaints, but frankly, if you know how to use a handgun RDS well, you're really not negatively served by it at all, because it has a deceptively large window, honestly. Because despite what people say about the large window of the RMR HD, all this really is a window that was raised slightly higher. The window is barely, and I mean barely, different in size to a Type 2 RMR. It's just, it sits slightly higher. That's it. So if your hand-eye coordination is where it needs to be, the RMR Type 2 is going to do everything that you need it to do without having to be flashy about it. And that's the best part, honestly. Never mind the fact that its battery, which is still a 2032, is going to get you crazy battery life to the point where I have never actually changed an RMR Type 2 battery because it was dead. I've just changed the things off of annual cycle time to make sure that I didn't get a surprise death of the battery. And more than one person, through just regular use, and this is rather telling because a lot of guys run their dots pretty bright to deal with different circumstances and times and things like that, as well as not being washed out by white lights, which are quite powerful these days, are still capable of getting 3.5 years of battery life. And it's funny because people talk about this optic not having a shake awake feature, but the battery universally outlasts anything that has one. So I don't understand why that's a big deal when it still outlasts its competition that has these shake awake features in the first place. And then we go to the other side of the house, talking about the Trijicon SRO. Now, lately it's starting to fall out of favor because the 507 comp exists, especially because the 507 comp is sort of proving itself to be significantly hardier than the SRO in general. Also, the 507 comp's lateral glass seems to be wider than that of the SRO as well, and when we're talking about allowing greater room for error on presentation of the gun, which is why you want a large window optic in the first place, because tracking the dot inside of the glass is not hard if you were taught how to control recoil on a handgun well, even if your individual grip strength is not strong enough to keep a gun tracking perfectly flat. The SRO is still a serviceable optic. Lots of people still use it. Lots of people still love it. And even though it was not made to be as hardy as a Type 2 RMR, and I've seen a lot of people outside of competition actually use it for concealed carry stuff simply because, well, the gun is against your body and is significantly better protected against, well, everything. So having the larger glass and greater allowance for error on presentation of the gun is what a lot of people use for their concealed carry stuff, and I can't really think of anything negative to say about that because it makes sense. Battery on the thing also lasts forever, so don't drop it on the hood and it's a great optic. So as you can tell, I don't have a long list of recommendations, but that's sort of how it goes as far as the optics world in general. When you start using things in high volume, a lot of the options start to just disappear because they are less and less valid as the days go by. All of the really fluffy feature sets seem to also not be a big deal as well because, frankly, the more that you shoot, the less you need because you recognize the difference between what's needed and what's just sort of there. But there it is. There's your recommendation video. So, if you'd like to come out and train with us, you can absolutely do that. Our open enrollment schedule is planned out through December, and you can always contact me for a private class if you'd like to set one up. If you'd like to support us through Patreon, you can absolutely do that as well, whether it's a small contribution or if you would like to get something out of it for yourself with $41 a month. Because through that program, you can attend as much open enrollment training as you would like from us, unless it's something logistically challenging, like a soft skin vehicle course for fairly obvious reasons. And if you'd like to follow us through our social media stuff, links for all of this are in the description below, including the Discord that I just opened. And of course, as always, remember guys, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.